What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another part of my mixing series, and today is part 4 of the mixing series, where we're going to be doing my favorite part of the mix, which is top-down mixing. We're actually going to be diving deep in getting a good sound out of the box really quickly and efficiently, actually. This is one of those processes I discussed in the quick tips month of March, where I did a video on top-down mixing and the overall concept of it, which I picked up from Graham Cochran over at the Recording Revolution. And it's really changed my viewpoint completely of how to mix music. It's a beautiful thing, and we're going to get into that in this video. But before we get started, if you haven't yet, please download the mixing cheat sheet in the description box below. It's totally free. It's a step-by-step guide of what the steps I follow to approach basically every mix that I do, and it gives you a really solid framework of how to view the different steps, you know, your different goals, what to listen for, and everything like that, just to take you from the initial volume balance all the way to the final master. So if you don't have that yet, please download it right now, and you can follow along with this mixing series, and it's just a lot of fun to do this type of stuff. So let's get into it. The only thing I've done from the last video that I didn't show on camera is I've highlighted all the tracks that play out audio, and I've actually lowered every single track just a little bit, with the exception of these group tracks and the master. And the reason was because everything was causing the stereo out channel to go around -3 decibels, and that was a little bit too high, for too close for comfort. As soon as something hits 0, that's when you start clipping, digital clipping, and then the overall product doesn't sound very good anymore. So what we want to do is hover in a space that's relatively comfortable. So a good level to shoot for is around like -16 or 14 to around -8 or so. So here you can see I'm at -11, but let me just play a little bit and show you where I am currently. Now let's go somewhere near the end as well. Right, so you see the peak is really -8.6, so I still have a lot of headroom. I'm not really close to clipping, which is good, so that's a good starting point. All right, so what is top-down mixing? Well, essentially, instead of starting from all the different individual tracks and applying EQ, like another EQ and compression and reverb and all that stuff, and working my way to the groups, applying processing to the groups, and then finally the master channel, which is kind of like a more traditional way of mixing, I'm actually going to start right from the master because I want to get a good sound right away, and that will take me about 80 to around 75 to 80% of the way there already. And then I can work backwards and go to the group tracks if there are things that need to be changed for the entire instrument section, and then go back to the individual instruments in case I need to do those further. So the first step, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to apply an EQ. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to put on span. So span is basically a frequency analyzer, and this is something I've started using recently. But basically, it shows you the mapping of the frequencies across the entire spectrum. And what we should be looking for is kind of like this. If you watch my screen, something that dips up and then kind of has a nice smooth line going downwards. And this is kind of a standard curve for a commercial release. So let's have a quick listen here. And before I start playing the music, I was just having a few more listens back to the track. And at this point we haven't really mixed yet. We're just in the pre-mix video, we kind of did a cutting out the bad frequencies and boosting some of the better ones and leaving those in. So upon listening to it again and again, I started to feel that the mids were a little bit heavy. I felt like they were kind of the low mids and the higher mids were boosted up a little bit, so it felt a little mid-heavy. And let's just see if span agrees with that. So here we go. We're gonna get into the big part. Here we go. All right, so if you take a look here, you see it's kind of what I suspected. Like we have this nice bump over here, and then normally we would expect to see everything start to go down a little bit. However, at this point, we still have these peaks coming up. So that's a lot of mid-range frequencies kind of sitting together and building up on each other. So what I want to do is bring up an EQ and see if taking out a little bit of that overall mid-range will help soften the mid sound a little bit, the mid-range sound. So you can see here, even Pro Q2 is doing, showing that the overall mix is a bit mid-heavy. So now I'm going to take off span. Pro Q2 is one of the reasons this is great, is it actually gives you a live demonstration of the frequency distribution. So you know what? It's actually very interesting. Even this one little move here, I felt it did kind of two things. Well, basically one thing, but it's kind of had a big drastic effect. So upon listening to it on and off the EQ, with it on, I heard the individual instruments sticking out a little bit more. I could tell the horns were in a certain spot. I could tell the glockenspiel was in another spot, and so on. However, when I turned this EQ on, it sounded like everything just gelled together a little bit better. Maybe it's just me, but you know, this little dip in the 1K range actually seemed to bring everything together a little bit, and I really like that effect. So let's have a listen to that, and maybe you can tell me if you agree or not. So this is on and this is off. And then on. It just seems to have a little more cohesiveness, and it's very. You can see I'm only lowering by 2.8 decibels, so it's a very not a very drastic cut actually. So the whole point of putting an EQ on the master is to see if you can do tiny little adjustments to enhance the overall mix without actually destroying everything and overdoing stuff. So in this case, I think that actually helped a little bit. It just gives it a more cinematic feel, honestly. It brings everything together a little bit. I think that's all I'm going to do there. And in terms of the low end, I've already done a lot of premix EQ already where I've dipped out the subfrequency, so I didn't need to do another high pass filter on that EQ. Okay? Let's continue. So what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to put on a stereo imager. So where is this? Not dynamics, imaging. Here we go. Direction mixer. So over here, it's kind of at the midpoint. Right now, we're at the current stereo spread. So if I bring these to the end, it's going to sound very stereo. So back to 1, and here's to 0. Okay, now this is something I preach on the channel, and this is something Graham Cochran does as well. A lot of mixers do actually. Mixing in mono is something you want to start doing because the changes and the processing you're doing has to be a deliberate thing. If you're just making moves for the sake of making moves, you're not really mixing with a purpose. So doing this pushes everything to the center. So any move you make has to make a change in mono. If it's not, then you might not even need to do that processing in like to tell you the truth, right? So everything's in mono now. So any decision I make is going to be very deliberate. And if I can hear it in mono, I'm definitely going to hear it in stereo. That's the whole point. Okay, before we go on, let's add a tiny bit of compression. So let's bring everything to gel together a touch more. Now, Logic comes with quite a few compressors, and these are all the different flavors. I'm just going to select one with the sound I prefer the most. Just loop this here. Kind of like this one, actually. It has kind of a warm retro sound in a way, so I'm going to stick with this one. And now I'm going to adjust the threshold until I can see the needle doing a tiny bit of gain reduction, at most maybe 1 decibel. And I'm going to turn the ratio down so it's about 1.5 to 1, because the amount of compression I want to do is very minimal, like I said. And then we're going to do turn up the makeup gain to compensate. Okay, so the needle's doing about like a little bit less than 1 decibel of gain reduction. So that just means the loudest parts, it's turning the level down or the volume down about 0.5 decibel. So as a result, I'm going to turn up everything, the entire mix, by about 0.5 decibel, just like that. So I'm just compensating. Now the soft parts are 0.5 decibel higher, and the louder parts are now brought down that to be a little bit closer to the softer parts. Okay, so this is basically a way to control the dynamics very subtly. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to apply one of my favorite plugins of all time, and it's going to be Mix Centric. So this is a way to sweeten the mix really quickly. So let's do this. Mix Centric over here. This is really like a magic plugin. Anyway, let's just hear this and turn this up. Okay, let's turn this on and off, and I'm going to turn off the mono as well. So this basically applies EQ, it applies some compression, it applies some saturation, sweetening, harmonics, whatever. It just does a whole bunch of stuff under the hood, and all you need to do is turn up the knob to the desired degree that you like. So let's listen to this on and off here for a second. So off. On. Do you hear the difference? So with it off, it sounds a little bit cloudy in comparison. And as soon as I turn it off, the horns punch through a little bit more. The clacks of the the snare hit come out a little bit more. Everything's just a little bit more present. So I think that's a really, really ingenious plugin, whatever Greg Wells and the team at Waves did. Awesome stuff. And then finally, I'm going to apply some harmonics with tone centric. So all right, and I'm pretty happy with that, honestly. I like how everything, contributes to a more cohesive and nicer sounding mix already. So let me just turn these plugins off first, and then we'll turn them on one at a time. I'm gonna leave the stereo on for a second so you can hear the differences. So number one, first of all, the EQ. Took out some of those low mids there, or the mids. Compression. Just a little bit more breathing in the music. Eccentric. And then tone centric. Now, this is very important to remember. So so 4 plugins on the master fader, excluding the directional mixer. If you can get a better sound with less plugins, that's always the goal. The goal is never to apply as many plugins as possible. The best mixers apply few plugins. So that's always something to remember. If you know what you're doing, if you know what you're going for, and you have a certain sound in mind, then work towards that sound. Right? The technical aspects of, little tips and tricks and, apply 3 decibels of gain reduction to this, or never cut more than 2 decibels. Those are just guidelines, right? But you have to follow your ear, and this is an kind of an indication of how to do that. So let's move on. Now I'm hearing, so I'm going to turn my directional mixer back on, so I'm in mono, and let's hear if I can apply anything to the overall instrumental groups. Are there anything here that feels like it's missing? Okay, so let's have a listen. So to me, it sounds relatively balanced right now. It's very possible that I might need some EQ on the very top just to bring out the very highs. I kind of like that. Alright, cool. Any mid stuff here we can take out. Now, another reason to be very subtle with EQ on group tracks is that anytime I'm cutting or boosting a certain section, I'm applying it to the entire or all of the tracks, that are routed to this group. So if I'm taking this out, this 893.47 hertz, I'm doing it because I'm hearing some of the lower strings are a little bit, boxy and a little bit muddy in this area, but this also takes out this amount on the violins as well. So tiny little moves will go a long way but there has to be a reason for it. And I think this tiny dip can actually help the mix, and benefit it. So you hear that kind of like radio sound? We kind of want to eliminate that just a little bit. How about the winds? I'm pretty happy with that. A lot of warmth in this frequency area. Let's give it a little bit of a boost. A little bit more resonance. Don't really need this too much, to be honest. There we go. Now, if you look at the percussion waveform itself, you can see the mid has a lot of these peaking frequencies as well. So see, it's coming up a lot, so I'm just notching them out just a touch here. Okay, have a little bit more air on the highest frequencies, just so it cuts through the mix just a little bit more. Cool. All right, now let's have a listen through and see if I can apply any processing to the individual tracks, if I even need to. So I'm going to play through. I'm going to see if there's anything else that's needed. And if not, I'm going to move on to reverb next. Okay. So let's have a listen. Now, automation is going to be the last step, by the way. Actually, I'm going to turn off these mono. So here we go. right. So in terms of the general balance, I'm very happy with it. In terms of the way the instruments are fitting together, I'm happy with that also. The tiny EQ touches we did overall really helped everything to sit together. So the final step of this video is to add some reverb now, because there are obviously instruments that are drier that need to fit in the ambience of the Sony scoring stage, because most of the instruments in this session are from Cinesamples, which they record at the Sony stage, just a lovely sound. So first, let's pull up our spaces too. So I'm going to choose a stage that has a very similar configuration to my ears as the Sony stage. So I'm going to choose a concert hall. We're going to choose the San Francisco hall, choose this front preset over here. And you can see the dry is completely down because the dry signal is going to be coming from the send when I send the instruments over. So that's going to be the dry signal. The wet signal is the affected signal. So how much reverb is actually, we hear. And then the pre-delay is the amount of time between the end of the instrument signal and then the start of the early reflections. Okay. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to start going to the instruments I think that are a little bit too dry, and then creating a send to send over to bus number 6, which is this reverb bus. As you can see, I created it as bus number 6. So I think these strings, I like the ambience on those because those are on this Sony stage anyway, and nothing wrong with that. Bass drum is fine. Tubular bells, maybe a little bit more reverb is good. So let's create a send, bus 6. Now what a bus does is it creates a new copy of the tubular bells and it sends it over to the reverb. So when I turn up the send dial, it's going to blend in the amount of reverb I have on the plugin, the reverb plugin, and it's going to blend it with a dry signal. So let's hear it by itself, actually. Let's go to a part with more tubular bells. You hear that's very ambient now, so. Let's hear that again. So you can't really hear it that well in the mix right now, the tubular bells, but I think that amount is pretty good. It makes a slight difference, you know? I'm quite happy with these strings over here. Well, Cinematic Studio strings could use a little bit of extra reverb. Let's open this up just to see where the strings are playing. So I think all of these can actually have a bit of extra reverb to them. So if I turn it up, very, very reverberant. Maybe just a little bit more. Nice. These other ones are all fine, I think. So this is string runs, that's Cinesamples, string trems, Berlin strings. Sony stage, Berlin strings is Teldec scoring stage, so a lot of reverb already. Cine strings, again Sony stage, and then CSS. So this is one more that needs the send. So let's put that on. Just a little bit of a tail. Okay, flute. Oboe could use a little more. maybe a touch the trumpets, even though they're recorded at the Sony stage as well, but I want to hear a bit of a tail for those. Okay, piano can definitely have a little bit. Okay, great. And I think I am pretty much done. So how long did that take? Okay, half an hour, right? Top-down mixing, just to recap, you apply a stereo imager to the first insert of the master. So just turn everything into mono first. Any decisions you make in there are going to be deliberate, and you have to hear the difference if you're going to commit to that change. Then you work down, right? You apply an EQ, you can apply a compressor if you want, just to capture the really highest peaks just a tiny bit. And then you can apply some tonal stuff just to process the entire mix a little bit and improve the sound. And then I worked backwards to the groups, and I applied a bit of EQ to those just to get them to sit together a little bit better. And then I went to the individual tracks and applied a little more processing it when it was needed to. Mainly it was just the reverb, to be honest. So everything else was sitting together quite nicely. And that's the cool thing about orchestral music. If you over manage it, if you try to get everything sounding perfect, you might be stuck for several hours. But the beauty in orchestral music is that it's played by humans, real humans, and we're trying to simulate a true recording where there's imperfections happening all the time. And so little bumps in volume, little things that might not be 100% in time are actually okay and part of the process. So a lot of these little imperfections can be forgiven, which I really appreciate. So yeah. And then I added some reverb at the end to the instruments that were a little bit just too dry. So yeah, and that is it. So now I'm going to have listened back to the final mix with the stereo spread or with this plugin off. And then I'm just going to make any final changes I need to with automation. So that's going to be the final video. Actually, this next video, there's going to be another one after that. But the next video is going to focus on automation. And that takes a while too, because we have to listen to basically what is the melody, and that melody has to be heard at all times. All the other instruments have to balance in relation to that melody part, nicely at all times as well. We want to make sure everything is heard, so it's very important. So yeah, that is basically this part. Thank you so much for watching. That is one of my favorite parts, top-down mixing. In the next video, we'll do automation. So that's kind of like the final polisher. But yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.